They came with rifles and rage, over 100 riders demanding one thing: hand over the wounded native man hiding inside that shack, or everyone dies. But the cowboy didn't flinch. He stood alone, one hand on his revolver, the other on the shoulder of the man he chose to protect. They thought he was shielding a killer. What he was really protecting was the truth. And when the boy stepped out, holding a silver badge, the mob finally realized they were pointing their guns the wrong way. Wind like sandpaper scraped across the plain, carrying with it the low hum of hooves, first distant, then rising like thunder in the belly of the earth. The sun had only just broken over the ridgeline, washing the riders in blood-orange light. Hundreds of them, packed tight along the ridge like jagged teeth, rifles slung or raised, bandanas already over mouths, organized, armed, ready. Below them, at the foot of a splintered bluff, a small shack stood alone like a defiant prayer. Its roof bowed inward. One shutter dangled like a broken wing. In front of it, motionless, was a man shaped from silence and dust. Hat low, jaw square, coat flapping in the wind. Before we uncover why a child's trembling voice stopped 100 rifles, what the silver badge buried in bloodied cloth truly proved, and how a single stand on dusty ground redefined justice for a whole town, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These stories aren't fiction, they're echoes of honor, mercy, and defiance that history nearly let die. Your support keeps them alive. One click helps us ride further, dig deeper, and give voice to those the silence tried to erase. Thank you. One hand rested calmly on the grip of his revolver. The other pressed gently against the shoulder of a man slumped beside him, barefoot, blood-crusted, wrapped in an old Union Army blanket now darker than it should have been. The native man's eyes were half closed, but his breathing was steady, deliberate, like someone who had already decided he would not plead. Inside the shack, behind a soot-streaked window, a child's face appeared. Wide eyes, mouth just slightly open. He didn't blink. The voice came from a man atop a black horse at the front of the ridge. He held an old military megaphone like it was scripture. His coat was clean, his beard trimmed with care. The kind of man who still believed the frontier was his to discipline. "Last chance," he called. "Hand him over, or none of you walk out." No echo, just the metallic clatter of rifle bolts being chambered. The riders behind him shifted in their saddles. Tension lived in their stillness, men and women waiting for a single trigger word, not from fear, but from fury unspent. The cowboy didn't move. He didn't flinch. The wind whipped his duster to the side, revealing a well-worn holster tied low and tight. His knuckles were pale against the handle, but his face was stone. Beside him, the native man coughed low and wet but said nothing. The boy's hand pressed against the inside of the glass. His breath fogged a small circle in the pane. A crow cawed from somewhere unseen. Behind the cowboy, an old preacher, once white-haired, now storm-colored, stepped halfway out the shack's doorway. He raised a hand, palm open. "There are children in here," he called, voice steady but cracking from wind and age. "This ain't justice, it's spectacle." The man with the megaphone ignored him. His eyes were locked on the cowboy, like a man watching a fuse burn. "You harbor a killer," he said. "Your reasons don't matter anymore. He comes out, or we all ride through that shack like it ain't even there." Still no answer. The cowboy's thumb clicked the revolver's hammer halfway back, a whisper of metal against metal. Behind him, the native man murmured something in a language the preacher didn't understand. The cowboy gave a slight nod. Not to the mob, not to the preacher, not even to the child. Just to the man who bled beside him. The megaphone wavered. The leader raised it again, this time louder, the wind catching his voice like a broken flag. "You got 10 seconds. Silence. Then, the click of a second revolver. And a whisper. "Then I reckon we use all 10. The saloon doors banged open, just as the wind picked up, and in its grasp came a man stumbling forward like he'd been chased by ghosts. Blood trailed him in thick, wet drops, dark against the dry red clay of the main street. His shirt was torn, one side of his face bruised black. He made it 5 paces before his knees gave, and he crumpled like a tent with no poles. The piano inside the saloon fell silent mid-note. 2 days earlier, from the porch, a bootstep. Slow, heavy, measured like a man not in a rush but always aware of time. The cowboy stood up from the barrel he'd been leaning against, a half-drunk tin of coffee cooling by his hip. His face didn't change, but his shoulders straightened. He moved without flair, without alarm, just walked into the street and dropped to one knee beside the fallen man. The boy from the general store froze with a broom halfway raised. A woman in a green dress covered her mouth. The bartender peeked out, already calculating how many drinks he'd have to pour to keep folks calm. The native man coughed, blood in his teeth. His eyes darted not wild, not crazed, but alert like prey watching the tree line for the next bullet. He tried to crawl away, even as the cowboy reached to steady him. "Easy," the cowboy muttered. "Ain't no one gonna shoot you in the back today." Someone in the saloon scoffed. "That one? Bet he's the reason the smoke's rising from the ridge." A woman whispered, "That's one of them." The sheriff arrived then, his badge glinting like an apology he didn't want to say out loud. He stepped out from between 2 horses, hand already resting on his sidearm. "Wes," he said, tone low but clear, "you don't know what you're getting into." The cowboy Wes stood, helping the wounded man to his feet with a grunt. The man leaned into him, too weak to walk but too proud to fall again. "I know exactly what I'm getting into," Wes replied, voice quiet enough that only the sheriff and the bleeding man heard it. "He stays with me." The sheriff looked past Wes to the gathering crowd, then back to the man whose word had once cleared a bar fight with a glance. The silence thickened. Inside the saloon, someone knocked over a glass. It shattered, sharp and clean. "He might have killed a rancher," the sheriff tried again. "A family's buried today because someone torched their homestead." "Might have," Wes repeated. "Ain't the same as did. You're gonna bring heat down on this town." Wes adjusted his grip on the man's shoulders. "Then maybe this town needs to know what it feels like." The preacher across the road stepped out of the church, watching. Eyes narrowed, hands still. The sheriff exhaled. "Don't say I didn't warn you." Wes said nothing more. He helped the man toward the small house behind the livery stable, the one nobody rented anymore. The child followed a few steps behind, holding a canteen and a blanket. No one told him to. He just did. As they disappeared inside, the wind picked up again. By morning, the whispers had turned into fences. Not the wooden kind, but the kind that crept into eyes, narrowed glances, and doors that no longer opened when Wes passed by. The general store shut down by noon. The barber shop drew its curtains like it was Sunday, though it was barely Wednesday. Word moved quicker than a prairie fire. "He took in a wounded native. He's hiding a fugitive. He's forcing trouble on all of us." Wes didn't argue. He never had much use for words anyway. Instead, he worked. Reinforced the old barn behind the house with lengths of timber he salvaged from a collapsed lean-to. Replaced every hinge with fresh nails. Laid out 2 rifles and a double-barrel shotgun on the workbench, cleaned and oiled. He tested the latch on the trapdoor to the cellar twice before nodding to himself. The boy watched from the corner, hugging the same canteen from the day before. Wes finally handed him a revolver, small, worn, one the kid had seen a dozen times but never touched. Wes didn't say much, just placed it in his hand and said, "Keep it pointed away from your foot." Inside the shack, the wounded man stirred restlessly. Fever clung to him like a second skin. Sweat beaded on his brow despite the chill. Wes sat beside him, tightening a fresh wrap around his ribs. The bandages smelled like old whiskey and dried sage. The man winced but made no sound. "I don't know your name," Wes said finally. The man turned his head, pain clouding his eyes. "Tama." Wes nodded once. "I ain't askin' what you did. I figure that'll come out when it needs to." Tama blinked slowly, then rasped, "It won't matter, not to them." Footsteps crunched outside. Wes stood, hand on his sidearm, but it was only the preacher. Rain had started to fall, faint at first, then with a steady insistence that filled every silence like ticking. "You know they'll come," the preacher said without preamble. "They won't care about right or wrong, they'll care about revenge." Wes leaned against the doorway, chewing a sliver of pine between his teeth. "Then let 'em come." The preacher's voice dropped. "They won't just burn you, they'll burn the whole town trying to make a point. You may not care, but others will, and they'll blame you for bringing war to their doorstep." "I didn't bring anything," Wes said. He showed up bleeding. "I didn't ask why." "That won't matter." The preacher stepped closer. "You got choices, right now. Before they ride in. Before it's too late." Wes glanced back at Tama, who had drifted into uneasy sleep. "I made my choice 2 days ago." The preacher exhaled through his nose, rain dotting his shoulders. "Then may God have your back, because the law won't." "And the people?" "They forget mercy when the sky turns red." Wes didn't answer. He only walked past the preacher into the barn, where he slid a crate of ammunition closer to the bench and lit a lantern against the darkening sky. The boy was still there, eyes wide but steady. Outside, the rain deepened. Every drop hit the tin roof like the tick of a clock winding down. One by one, it drowned the sounds of the town. A door being bolted, a horse being moved into a stable. A woman pulling her child inside and shuttering the window. The air hung thick with waiting. With judgment. And the storm hadn't even arrived yet. The rain had stopped by the time they came, not the mob, not yet, but the beginning of it. A scouting party dressed like a delegation. 6 riders in long coats, boots still wet from the ride, dust mingling with mud on their stirrups. They didn't come fast. They wanted to be seen. They wanted the town to watch. Wes stood in the center of the road as they approached, hat low, coat unbuttoned. Behind him, the boy waited on the porch. Tama just inside, sitting upright now, breathing hard but steady. The preacher leaned against the church doorframe across the street, arms folded, eyes like storm clouds that hadn't decided whether to break or not. The riders reined in sharply. The lead horse, a tall, muscled roan, kicked once before settling. Its rider was clean-cut, too polished for this part of the frontier. His coat was black, gloves immaculate, and pinned to his lapel was a silver clip that had once belonged to his father. His eyes didn't blink. "You know who I am," he said. Wes didn't respond. "My name's Ash Van. My father was Eli Van. You remember him?" Wes nodded slowly. "I do. He's dead now, burned alive in his sleep with 2 hired men on his land east of the ridge. We tracked the prince, we followed the path. And it ends with you, harboring him." He pointed past Wes toward the doorway, where Tama sat in shadows, unmoving but very much watching. "Tell me," Ash said, voice steady like a blade. "Why would you protect a man like that?" Wes's jaw flexed, the only sign he'd heard. "He came here bleeding," Wes said at last. "Didn't ask for much, didn't run, didn't even carry a weapon." Ash chuckled, but it was empty. Maybe he's smart. Maybe he knew some idiot would feel noble enough to bleed for him. The crowd had gathered by now. Shopkeepers, ranch hands, even the sheriff, all standing back, none speaking. Watching, judging. Waiting for something to shove them one way or another. "You hand him over," Ash said. Eyes locking on Wes. "And we walk. No fire, no bullets, no questions. You get to live with your conscience. Or not." And if he's innocent? Wes asked. Ash didn't answer right away. That silence was its own sentence. You think it matters? He finally said. My father's still dead, my men still burned. You think guilt is what fuels vengeance out here? The murmurs in the crowd deepened. Some looked away, others stared harder. Truth made them uncomfortable. Doubt made them dangerous. Then, unexpectedly, a voice pierced the tension. He saved me. All heads turned. The boy stood at the edge of the porch, fists clenched, cheeks flushed with something between fear and rage. His voice shook but didn't break. There was a fire, he said. In the barn, I got trapped. He dragged me out. I couldn't breathe. Nobody else went in, not even the sheriff. The silence cracked, not with sound, but with meaning. The preacher looked at Ash. Tell me, he said softly. What does that make him? A killer, or a man who didn't look away? Ash's face didn't move, but his glove tightened around the reins. You've got one day, he said. Then we stop asking. The riders turned. As they disappeared down the road, the wind picked up again, this time dry and biting, a storm without clouds, just the promise of reckoning. The night was cold, even for spring. A sharp kind of cold that got in your bones, not through temperature, but tension. The kind of cold that made the boy sleep with one eye open, cradling the revolver he still didn't quite know how to use. Wes had gone back to the barn, finishing some repair he probably didn't need to make. He just needed the rhythm of hammer and nail to hold off the noise inside his head. Inside the shack, Thomas slept uneasily. Sweat slicked his brow, but the fever had begun to break. He murmured in a language the boy didn't understand, the syllables round and soft like songs with sharp ends. Every now and then, he twitched like his body remembered running even when it couldn't move. The boy sat in the corner, knees pulled up, listening to the night crackle outside. He didn't mean to snoop. It just happened. The satchel lay half open at Tama's feet, the flap pushed aside when he shifted in his sleep. Curiosity's a quiet thing until it's not. The boy crawled over slowly, careful not to wake him, and peeked inside. There wasn't much. A few wrappings of jerky, long gone stale. A leather-bound book, too water-warped to read. A strip of cloth stained with old blood. And then, the glint. It caught the lamplight just enough to whisper something metallic. He reached in, fingers brushing leather, then cold silver. It was a badge. Not a star like the sheriff's. Not the tin type they sell to children, but something older, heavier, stamped with the eagle and crossed arrows of the U.S. Army. Below it, faded but legible, were the words, Field Scout, 7th Division. The boy's breath caught. He turned it over in his palm. It wasn't for show. This wasn't some trinket. It was real, official. He'd seen one before once, long ago, when an army captain came through town asking about deserters. Wes had spat in the dirt after he left, but even he hadn't denied the badge was real. The boy looked at Tama again. This man wasn't running from the army. He was part of it. Wes entered a moment later, boots heavy on the floor. The boy turned, badge clutched in both hands, not quite sure if he was doing something wrong or very, very right. He's not what they say, the boy said, eyes wide. Wes stepped closer, brow furrowing. The boy handed him the badge. Wes studied it in the lamplight for a long moment, jaw tightening. Scout, he said under his breath. That's why he didn't run. They both looked at Tama, who stirred then, eyes fluttering open. His voice was hoarse. They killed a liaison, he whispered. Our man. Ambushed him. Burned the camp. Made it look like us. But it wasn't. Who? Wes asked. Tama's eyes didn't blink. Settlers. Ex-soldiers. Men like Van. The room felt smaller. He's not after justice, Tama said. He's cleaning the trail. Outside, a horse whinnied in the distance. The preacher's bell rang once, maybe from the wind, or maybe from something worse. Wes stood there, badge in hand, while truth reshaped the entire story around him. The wrong man was bleeding, and the real killers were wearing clean coats and practiced rage. The first sign was dust-wide, rising columns that stretched for miles across the horizon like smoke from a prairie fire. It rose in spirals, danced with the wind, and curled into the sky like it had a soul of its own. But it wasn't fire, it was hooves, riders. Dozens at first, then scores, then a tide. By the time they crested the far ridge, there were hundreds, silhouettes against the rising sun, rifles strapped to saddles, bandanas tied over mouths. Not a posse, not a lawful force. An army born of anger and held together by rumor. The preacher saw them first from the steps of the church. He didn't move, didn't ring the bell. Just stood with his hands clasped behind his back, eyes hard. A crucifix swung on his chest like a ticking clock, one that knew time was running out. The sheriff, by contrast, packed a bag. He wasn't quiet about it. Slammed his office door, muttered to no one. Holstered his weapon with shaking hands, he tried to steady with whiskey. When he stepped into the street, townsfolk parted like he was already a ghost. He didn't meet any eyes, just mounted his horse, kicked it hard, and galloped west without a word. Wes watched him go from behind the barn, shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. He didn't call after him, didn't judge him either. Some men fold before the storm, some men plant their boots and wait. Inside the shack, Tama was sitting upright now, sweat slick but conscious. The boy knelt beside him, holding a damp cloth against his brow. The badge lay on the table, catching sunlight through a broken window pane. Wes entered without speaking. Tama looked up, eyes hollowed but alert. He didn't ask how many were coming. He already knew. "If I die," he said, voice dry as cracked earth, "tell them. Show them. Don't let them write me as a ghost." Wes nodded. "If you die, it won't be quietly." The ground trembled as the riders neared, hundreds of boots and hooves, beating out a rhythm that sounded like war drums wrapped in leather and hate. Dust swallowed the lower part of the town. Buildings disappeared behind a veil of orange haze. The sun dimmed. Wes handed the boy a box of cartridges. "You remember what I said? Don't aim unless I mean it," the boy whispered. "That's right." He ruffled the boy's hair once, briefly, before stepping back outside. The air stank of sweat, dust, and coming judgment. The kind of day the plains remember long after men forget. From the edge of town, the riders slowed, fanned out like a half-circle of wolves. Their leader rode at the front, still clean, still confident. Ash Van didn't shout this time. He let the image speak for itself. Over 100 rifles behind him, all waiting for a nod. Wes stood alone in the street, hands loose, back straight, coat brushing his boots. In the distance, thunder rolled not overhead, but low, grumbling from the south. A dry storm, no rain. Just sound. Echoes of something ancient. The preacher stepped up beside Wes. He carried no gun, just the cross and a worn book tucked under his arm. "You ever seen this many come for one man?" Wes asked quietly. The preacher's jaw tightened. Not for justice, just for permission. Then, silence. A silence so sharp, it felt like the world itself held its breath. Then a single voice rose from behind them, cracked but clear. "I'll walk out if it ends this." It was Tama. He stood in the doorway, shoulders square, badge in hand. Wes turned, eyes narrowed. "You won't, because this ain't yours to die for." And from behind the dust curtain, the first boot hit the ground. The siege had begun. The air between the two sides was too thick to breathe, too dry to sweat. Dust clung to eyelids and lips, and every man in the circle of riders had one hand near steel. Wes didn't move, his feet planted in the red dirt, coat flapping like a torn flag. Behind him, the preacher stood with a stillness that made men uneasy. And Tama, pale and unsteady, leaned against the doorframe, the badge hidden just out of view, tucked in his palm like a coin that could buy either truth or death. Ash Van sat tall in the saddle, eyes sweeping the line. His voice cut through the tension like a polished knife. "You've made your stand, now make your grave." But before he could signal, before the rifles could raise as one, a new sound pierced the stillness. Bare feet on hard earth. The boy. He sprinted across the road, dust kicking up around him, something gripped tight in his small hand. No one stopped him, no one thought to. He was just a child, unarmed, powerless. And yet when he reached the space between Wes and the riders, time slowed like it didn't know what came next. He held the badge high above his head. "He's not who you think." Every gun that had started to rise froze in place. Riders muttered. Hooves shifted. Even Ash looked startled, the fury in his eyes flickering into confusion. The boy turned, spinning slowly, letting them all see. The silver badge caught the morning light and threw it like sparks into the crowd. "He's a scout," the boy said, voice breaking but strong. "For the army. He's not a raider. He saved me from the fire, and you're about to hang him because someone told you to." A ripple moved through the crowd. Not words, just weight. Guilt, doubt. It moved like wind through wheat, one face after another softening just slightly. Ash opened his mouth, then shut it again, his jaw clenching. The preacher stepped forward next, walking past Wes, past the boy, standing now in the center of both worlds. His voice was calm, worn, but clear. "There was a treaty," he said. "Signed after the war. Scouts like him fought for our flag, bled for it, buried their own brothers under it. And when the ink dried, they were promised land, safety, a name cleared." He paused. "But we forgot. We moved on. We chose vengeance over memory. And now you stand here, guns drawn, ready to finish what others started on a man who kept his word when we didn't." A rider near the back lowered his rifle. Then another. Then an old man near the front, weather-beaten and bitter-eyed, looked down at his own trembling hands and slid his pistol back into its holster. Ash's horse snorted. He gripped the reins tighter. His eyes darted, counting who still held firm, who was falling away. "You think a child's word changes facts?" he barked. "You think a badge proves a damn thing?" The preacher turned slowly to face him. "I think truth doesn't shout. It waits." And it just did. Ash looked around and saw what he feared most: uncertainty. The certainty that had carried his vengeance all this way was cracking. His power had been in their belief, and now, belief had splintered. His hand shook. Not much, but enough. And everyone saw it. The standoff stretched into silence, the kind that doesn't simply fall but presses. Dozens of riders sat frozen, the silver badge gleaming faintly in the child's hand like a quiet rebellion against the weight of blood and rumor. Ash Van's eyes swept the line of his men, searching for assurance and finding only hesitation. He knew the spell had broken. "We don't take votes," he snapped. "We take justice." But even as he said it, a rider near the center raised his hand, older, gray around the beard, eyes sunken but watchful. "Justice," the man said flatly, "ain't as loud as it used to be." Then another rider, mid-30s, dust-covered, one sleeve torn, cleared his throat. "I came for a killer, not a scout. If there's doubt, we shouldn't shoot." A third, younger, no more than 20, mumbled, "He saved the kid." That ought to count for something. Wes watched all of it from the front line, shotgun still lowered but his eyes never blinking. Beside him, Thomas stood straight despite the pain, blood seeping slow from his side, badge now pinned to his chest like a final gamble. Ash was losing ground. And he knew it. "You're all fools," he spat. "He burned my father's house. He slit the throat of our men. You ever see him do it? Came a voice from the back. Ash spun. What? Did you see it, Ash? The crowd parted. A rider stepped through, lean, scar-lined, with one eye clouded white and a gait like he'd seen too many winters and remembered each one. His name was Burke Tally, a man few spoke to and no one crossed. Quiet, but never absent. You told us you tracked him, Burke said, voice like dry bark. But there were no prints after the ridge, just smoke. You said it led to him, but no one else saw the trail. Ash narrowed his eyes. You calling me a liar? No. Burke took another step forward. I'm calling you the one who lit the damn fire. A collective gasp rippled. Wes straightened, shotgun rising slightly. Even Tama seemed to brace. Ash's hand dropped toward his holster. Don't, Wes said, calm as a coffin lid closing. But Ash was already moving. The pistol cleared leather. One shot cracked. Loud, sharp, final. Ash dropped sideways off his horse, the gun falling just after him, kicking up dust as it hit the ground. A dark bloom spread across his chest, staining that perfect black coat. Burke stood still, his revolver still smoking. Saw him ride east that night, he said. Didn't think much of it until now. Guess I should have spoken sooner. The horses snorted. Riders stared, stunned not by death, but by clarity. The preacher stepped forward. This was never a question of guilt. It was a test of what we do with doubt. One by one, the riders lowered their weapons. Some turned back toward the ridge. Others just sat still, finally seeing the dust for what it was, ash, not truth. The boy exhaled, and it sounded louder than the shot. Justice had not shouted, but it had answered. The grass had started to grow back where the dust once ruled, green shoots pushing up through hard earth like the land had finally exhaled. The air was warmer now, quieter too. Birds returned to the fence posts. The blackened patch where Ash Van had fallen was barely visible, just a darker stain where even the grass seemed to hesitate. Wes hadn't said much since. He still rode out each morning, same as always, hat low, coat flapping behind him. He'd check the fence lines, mend what needed mending, stop by the preacher's church to leave tools or food without a word. And then he'd ride back, slow and deliberate, as if each hoofbeat pressed the memory of that day deeper into the dirt. In the field behind the livery stable, the boy now rode circles on a small chestnut mare. He wasn't great, not yet, but he stayed in the saddle, even when the horse snorted or turned sharp. Each time he lost balance, a calm voice would call out from nearby, always in the same steady cadence. Lean with her, don't fight her. Tama stood by the fence, no longer bandaged, no longer pale. His skin had color again, his movements no longer winced. He watched the boy ride with an expression halfway between pride and awe, like he couldn't believe the world still let him witness peace. The badge was gone. Buried beneath the tree line to the north, wrapped in cloth and sealed with a flat stone. A marker not for what he did, but for what he endured. He didn't need to wear it anymore. The truth had already spoken. The preacher approached the split-rail fence where Wes leaned. The old man didn't speak right away. Just looked out at the boy and the scout, the way a man might look at a fire that hadn't gone out, grateful, cautious, reverent. You didn't have to stay, he said finally. Wes didn't answer. You could have handed him over, walked away, clean. No blood on your land, no threats, no judgment. Still nothing. But you didn't. The preacher's voice softened. You chose mercy when the world begged for blood. Wes exhaled slowly, as if some part of him had been holding that breath for weeks. It wasn't mercy, he said. It was right. The preacher nodded, hands clasped behind his back. Most men can't tell the difference anymore. They stood there a while, not speaking, just watching the boy laugh as the horse bucked playfully, Tama jogging alongside, steadying him with one hand and guiding him with the other. Two people the town once feared, now teaching each other how not to fall. Wes turned away first, mounting his horse and heading off toward the ridge, where fence wire waited and silence followed. The preacher stayed behind, staring out at the field, the breeze lifting his coat just slightly. And in that quiet space between memory and forgiveness, a question drifted on the wind. Would you have stood your ground or walked away? Because next time, the world may not give you that choice.